Hip mobility, very mobile joint. Let's talk a little bit about that today. The hips should move a lot, like your shoulders, like your wrist. There should be a lot of movement in that joint. If there is not, then you will get compensations above the joint or below the joint. So if we're talking about the hips, what's above it? The low back. What's below it? The knees. So typically, if you have low back pain or knee pain, there's a good chance your hips aren't working properly. So if those muscles aren't working, it's going to compensate. Increased compensation increases wear and tear on the muscles. Increased wear and tear leads to aches and pains, and nobody wants to be in pain. So what do we do about this? Our step-by-step approach is listed right here. We only talk about the first two. This is just hip mobility. Strength can be a whole nother talk. So step one is to be releasing the muscle, self-myofascial release. And number two is stretching and actually starting to lengthen short and tight muscles. The first step would be muscle release. So let's just start with the hip flexors and the quads. These are foam rolling techniques. You could get a massage, but if you just wanted to start simply, most gyms would have a foam roller handy. This is the hip flexor massage. So you want to start below that bony part in the hip. Never roll on bones. You want to roll on muscle. So pick the worst spot. You can go higher, lower, inside, or outside. Pick the spot that's the most tender. Moving on would be the inner thigh, the adductors. So you want to get the right in the middle of the muscle. And despite the roll, the cylinder foam rolling, you don't need to actually roll like a rolling pin. Just pin the most tender spot in place and hold it there. Hold about 30 to 60 seconds just to start. Foam rolling those glutes. You don't want to be in the tailbone. You don't want to be in the low back. Get right in between. Pick a side and then explore. Same deal. Find the most tender spot. Hold it, breathe, and relax. Moving on to stretching. First things first is your pelvic tilt. When you're stretching your hip flexors, you want to be in that posterior pelvic tilt. So when you're doing hip flexor stretches, quad stretches, try not to arch your back because it minimizes the effect of lengthening on that muscle. Stretching the inner thighs and the glutes. This is the butterfly and pretzel stretch. So one is prying the knees open to work into those inside muscles. And with the glutes, it could be done seated on a bench. You can do it on the floor as well. But crossing the ankle, opening the hip, and then flexing forward, rounding at the back. Awesome stretch for the butt. Putting it all together, a reminder, the hips should move a lot. If they don't move, it's going to get that movement from somewhere else. The steps, at least to get started, is to do self-myofascial release, 1 through massage or 2 through self-myofascial release. Next, once you're actually releasing that muscle and essentially breaking apart adhesions, you've heard of muscle knots. Once it's broken apart, you can actually start to stretch, lengthen, and restore range of motion. Per usual, for any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, or snide remarks, leave me a message, shoot me an email, but otherwise we'll see you in the next fitness video and when your hips are moving, mobile, and healthy.